morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Steve Tcherchian, Chief Product Officer and Chief Information Security Officer at Xipro. And thank you for taking time out of your day to join our webinar this morning, talking about integrating your HPE NonStop servers with ServiceNow. On the webinar today, we've got Xipro's Chief Architect, Jorge Alonzo, who'll be joining us and walking us through some of the use cases of how to take advantage of the ServiceNow to NonStop integration. Jorge, this is a great topic that a lot of our customers have been asking about, and I'm thrilled that you can join us and looking forward to what you have to talk about today.
Yeah, Steve, I'm really excited to be here, man. Raring to go. Let's get this thing going.
Okay, great. Let's jump into it. So in today's agenda, we're going to cover a little bit about who Xipro is and the services we offer. We'll talk about ServiceNow, which I guarantee you most of you already have in your environment. Then we'll talk about the benefits of integrating NonStop with ServiceNow. And then we'll talk about our requirements, and Jorge will cover our architecture and what the technical ins and outs look like. And then we'll wrap it up with the use cases, the most common use cases our customers use once that integration is in place. A little bit about Xipro. We've been in the mission critical cybersecurity space since 1983. We are headquartered in sunny Southern California, and the weather today could not be nicer. We've got expertise in nonstop cybersecurity, compliance, and database management. And here in the next month or so, we're going to be announcing a new product line structured around SAP HANA workloads. So we're going to offer the same mission critical security that we offer in nonstop for the SAP HANA environment. So if there's interest in that, please reach out to us. We're globally distributed for our sales and support offices, so we cover all time zones around the globe. We've got a very strong partnership with HPE going back several decades, and we've got the only SailPoint and CyberArk certified integrations for NonStop. So I guarantee you, most of you have SailPoint, CyberArk, and or ServiceNow in your environment, along with NonStop. So if you've missed the webinars on the CyberArk integration or the SailPoint integration, please feel free to visit our website and just go into the search box, type in SailPoint and CyberArk, and those webinars will come up and you'll find out how you integrate and take advantage of integrating NonStop with those technologies. So we've got strategic partnerships with the likes of SAP, SailPoint, CyberArk, ServiceNow, HPE, and always adding more and more partners to our portfolio. As our customers come to us and request more integrations for NonStop, it's very easy to leverage the technology that we've got to extend into these other solutions. If you've got a NonStop, you probably already know you're a Xipro customer. You've got Xygate Merged Audit, which allows you to send data from your NonStop to things like Splunk, QRadar, Elk, Elastic. You've also got Xygate User Authentication, which is your two-factor authentication technology for NonStop. Like I mentioned earlier, we're globally distributed 24/7 support operation. And we're fluent in over 24 different languages. So if you reach out to Xipro and need help in a language other than English, we've probably got somebody on our staff that can help you out. Xipro's global strategy is establishing Xipro as your enterprise security partner. We're not just a vendor that's moving solutions out to the market. We want to partner with you to make sure that we're addressing the challenges, the problems, and your roadmap items that you have in play for this year and beyond. So we do that by focusing on three key areas: is innovation, to leverage the technology that we have to enter new markets. That's why we can integrate with things like SailPoint and CyberArk and ServiceNow and others, because of the foundational technology that we already have built that allows us to solve real-world challenges that you might have. Modernization, we're hearing a lot about this word. It's simplifying business processes and modernizing the user experience. We're all having to do more with less, and having the tools at our disposal to allow us to make our job just a little bit easier will help everybody. That way we can focus our efforts on more high value tasks. And integration. In a connected world like this, where everything needs to talk to everything else, NonStop is no longer that box in the corner. You need to ensure that NonStop can continue to integrate and leverage your other enterprise investments like ServiceNow, SailPoint, CyberArk, Splunk, and others. So that's where we're focusing on. Most of you should already be familiar with ServiceNow, and I guarantee you most of you already have it in your environment. If you don't have an active project right now to integrate NonStop with ServiceNow, I guarantee you it's coming down the pike. It's just a matter of time before the project manager gets down to item number 9 on the list, which has HPE NonStop on it. ServiceNow is in most environments. It provides IT workflow management, it provides employee workflows, customer workflows, creator workflows. It can be your IT ticketing system. It could be your change management system. It's very, very flexible and extendable to a lot of business processes. Its main goal is to automate as much of this functionality as possible. Now, they're also leading the market when it comes to this type of offering. In fact, they're in the top right-hand corner of the Gartner Magic Quadrant, which means they're probably one of the most innovative market leaders when it comes to this type of technology. And how Xipro has partnered up with ServiceNow is to provide an integration between the platform, between the NonStop platform and ServiceNow to allow you to validate privileged access. And that's really the key. Is moving to a zero trust model, you've got to validate everything. It's no longer good enough that a user has permissions to do something. You need that third-party validation, and ServiceNow comes into play to allow us to do that for NonStop. Is even though you can enter a privileged command, unless ServiceNow gives you the thumbs up that that command can execute, that command will not execute. And that's the most common use case that we're going to see here in a few slides. It's very seamless integration. Our integration is a plugin to Zygate Access Control. And most of you already know Zygate Access Control provides role-based access control and keystroke logging for NonStop servers. So this is an add-on module to that functionality. It'll help you comply with PCI DSS requirements, additional requirements such as 1.1.1 and 6.4, which focus on change management. And it's very, very flexible in terms of all the different attributes that you can put into the picture to validate. So we can validate just on a ServiceNow ticket number. We can validate the user that's executing the command. We can validate the system that the command is being executed on. That way we ensure that the right user is executing the right command on the right system. We can have time windows. We can check command syntax and ensure the command being issued is the same that the ServiceNow ticket is responsible for and beyond. So very flexible, very extensible, easy to install, easy to take advantage of. Now, with all that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Jorge Alonzo, Xipro's chief architect, who's going to walk us through some of the technical architecture and use cases. George, over to you.
Thank you, Steve. So before I get started, guys, welcome everyone. Really glad to be here to share this information with you. It's very exciting times for us. Before I get started, though, I'd like to share a little bit of my background. I've been on the NonStop platform for about 40 years now. That's a very long time. I started in system management and eventually transitioned into software development. Over the last 18 years, I've spent with Xipro working on software development and working with an awesome team of talented developers. Believe it or not, I'm still having a whole lot of fun, even though I've been on the platform for a long time, especially working with guys like Steve, guys with a great insight and good ideas and always pushing us to hit our limits. Having said that, here we go. Let's get started with the requirements. Oops, sorry about that. Here are some of your basic requirements for the plugin. You will need an instance of ServiceNow that is reachable by at least one of your NonStop servers. Your NonStop server should be running a minimum of J06 or higher, or L16 or higher. You need our Zygate AC version 6.25 installed and configured or licensed for the ServiceNow plugin. OSS must be available and accessible with a minimum of Java 8 installed. A NonStop user ID will be used as the application owner and must have full access to the OSS installation directory. And lastly, you will need a TCP stack that will be used for the web service connector. A word of caution with the TCP stack and the web service connector: if there are any networking policies that may interfere with the accessibility of the ServiceNow instance, then this is something you're going to need to address ahead of time before the plugin can work. with our solution. And here we have a very high level of view of the architecture of our solution. As you can see, there are some components that work in the Guardian space and some that work in the OSS space. The Guardian-based ones are our core XAC product with its own installer. And then we do have a separate installer for the OSS counterparts. When we first started the design of this architecture, we had three goals in mind. One was, we wanted something that would be very flexible, something that would be easy to maintain, but most importantly, we wanted to introduce this plugin that would not require us to make any coding modifications to our core XIC product. And I think with this solution, we did get to accomplish that. And I want to touch a little bit on that particular point. XAC currently has an existing feature that allows us to do some kind of a pre-processing before control is given to a user for the session that they started. And this feature is the input attribute of the XAC command configuration. So by taking advantage of this pre-processing logic, we are able to intercept the user session request and trigger a ServiceNow workflow that will enable us to validate a ticket for access to the system. It's a very simple process and very simple workflow. As you can see, I have a label 1 through 5, the workflow that happens with this architecture. Once you've enabled an XAC command, and this command is initiated by a user, the workflow starts by flowing through a new program that we've provided, and that is the user interface program that I'm calling XWSCCom. This program has two property files. One is used to configure the OSS environment, and the other one, and also configure the user prompts, plus it contains some evaluation criteria for the ticket. The other configuration file is the Json API file, which is primarily used for the ServiceNow interface, configuring URL and some authentication parameters. Once the message is received by this utility program, the user will be prompted for 3 items, and that is a ticket type, a ticket number, and a reason for the access. The ticket type could be 3 different things, 3 different types of tickets. We currently support the incident tickets, a change request ticket, or a problem management ticket. So these are the things that we currently support. Once this program processes the request, it's forwarded to our EP agent process, which runs in the OSS space, that does some further validation on the payload, and then it fires off the web service connector. Our web service connector is a Java application that uses a Java key store. The Java key store is used to establish a secure connection with the ServiceNow instance. Once a connection has been established, then we start the authentication process using either basic or OAuth 2. Those are the currently 2 supported authentication schemes today. If the authentication succeeds, we issue a query request to the ServiceNow instance in step 5, as you see here, using a REST API. And the response from ServiceNow is forwarded all the way back using the same transaction path to the user interface program in step 2. Once this utility receives the message is processed, the ticket criteria is evaluated. If the ticket evaluates to true or it's valid, we will give user access to the XAC session that they started. If we determine that the ticket is not valid, then we will terminate the session immediately and the user will be returned to the previous logged in state. A couple of things to note here. We have several log files in play here, including the XAC audit file that comes standard with the product, where we do all the keystroke logging and all the auditing of the commands. There's a few additional logs that we use, and they're primarily used for troubleshooting purposes when you're setting up the system and having issues. And there's a lot of information that we log there to assist you in figuring out what could possibly be wrong with your setup. Also, we do have a debug facility built into this architecture that allows us to basically test each component independent of XAC. So you don't have to really configure the XAC command to test this out. You can run the user interface program in a standalone fashion to test, the connectivity, test the user prompts, and so on. And the same thing goes with the web service connector. If you want to test the connectivity to your endpoint, you can format an API file that can be sent to ServiceNow, and that way you can test the connectivity, and you can also make sure that the request is properly formed. So these are a couple of tools that we provide to you to let you, do some pre-staging, set up the system before you actually start configuring your XAC commands to take advantage of this plugin. A final note on this is these components, if you are in a multi-node environment, you would have to install these components on each system. But you may have a case where only one of your nodes can reach the ServiceNow instance. But that's not a problem, because you can funnel all your other nodes can funnel the transaction requests through this one node that is reachable. And we've done this with a previous customer where this was a particular case. Only one node had access to ServiceNow, but the others didn't. But again, it's with the current architecture, you can do this with some configuration on the XIC side to allow you to go through expand. But a caution here, going through expand may introduce some latency issues for you, but it does work. This is something that you're faced with, and it's very, very doable. So how do we configure XAC to take advantage of this plugin? Well, as Steve said, it's very seamless and simple, guys. Let me show you how we do that. All right. One of the most common use cases that every customer has installed is Tackled Session running a super. And with the standard product, it's already configured. But all you need to do is a couple of minor modifications to your ACL to take advantage of the plugin. And it's very simple. The process starts by configuring the objects, which in this case is going to be Tackled, that is going to be started. And that very slick attribute that I talked about earlier, the input attribute of an XAC command, what this will allow us to do is to trigger the ServiceNow workflow by doing some pre-processing. And that pre-processing is launched by starting a tackle routine that we provide with the product that will trigger the workflow for us. In this case, as you can see in this example, we're calling it PrivMag, and that's just how it's shipped. But it doesn't really need to be called PrivMag. You can call this whatever you want to call it. But again, just be cautious. If you install this over again, you will have another version of that PrivMag routine. So just be careful if you decide to do that. Once this routine is launched and it completes, then we will either grant access to the session or we will deny. Very simple. Again, I also show here a couple of other attributes for a command configuration that are relevant to the site. I'm not showing a complete list, but just the ones that are relevant for the plugin. As you can see here, I have the audit output count 1, which allows us to do some auditing to the logs. %on, that allows us to do some variable substitutions, and then no assigns to prevent tackle from loading up any assigns in the environment by a user. Again, very simple workflow, very simple configuration change to enable a tackle command to run a super. Now let me show you a running example of this command. Okay. The process starts by a user invoking. In this case, I've called my command tackle 255 snow, which is just another tackle running as a super user. Next, what happens is we invoke the PrivMag routine that is the trigger for the ServiceNow ticket validation workflow. And as you see here, we see privileged access verification in process. The user now is prompted for 3 items: the ticket type, a ticket number, and a reason for the access. And they must provide this information for us to continue the validation checks. If the request is approved, the user is logged into super, which is what they requested with the XAC command. And when the user exits, the users return back to their previously logged in state. Very simple workflow. So with a normal XAC command execution, this is what you will see with the exception of the prompting for the ServiceNow workflow. And that's the only difference here is the trigger of the ticket validation flow that is required because that's how we've instrument that XAC command. Very simple to do, very easy. And it's very straightforward. Here's an example of when a ticket is valid. What happens when the ticket that you entered is not valid? For various reasons. We do an evaluation and we determine whether the ticket is valid. This is what happens. We start again with the invocation of the command. The workflow is triggered. The user provides answers to the prompts. And after the evaluation, we come back saying invalid ticket state. So during our evaluation process, the response we got back from ServiceNow came back with a state field that did not match the criteria that you specified initially for this particular flow. So we reject the request and we terminate the session immediately and return the user back to their logged in state. Again, it's a similar workflow as the previous example, but in this case, we terminate the session and we prevent the user from accessing this particular session. Very simple. So this is an example of
George, I see two big advantages from what you just described, and helps us get to more of a zero trust model. Is even if that user on the nonstop has access to become super, unless ServiceNow says they can become super, even though they have the ability to become it, they won't become it. That way, if those credentials are ever compromised or somebody is trying to do something under the hood and misuse their level of access, that level of zero trust is going to prevent them from doing anything damaging.
You're absolutely right, Stephen. That's exactly the point here. We instrument this command to prevent such access when the enterprise or their enterprise policy has said, hey, you need a ticket and this ticket has to match a certain criteria for you to be able to get into the system. And if those don't match, then we will reject it right away. And that's exactly what you saw here.
Awesome. And then the other thing I noticed is the prompts are everything's being done in real time. Where I know there's customers that need to integrate with ServiceNow but don't have this integration, or this integration didn't exist rather. So they would still have those prompts, but everything would either go into a flat file or into a database that had to be reconciled manually on a weekly or monthly basis. But that's after the fact, that's manual effort, whereas this is doing it all in real time.
Exactly, real time. And I think we've had some customers that are doing exactly what you just said, but this just kind of made the process a little more secure for them and tighter. So yes, and save them a lot of time and effort in maintaining another system.
Fantastic.
Good point, Steve. So previous example was for Tackle. Now, what do you do if you have other utility programs configured to run in XAC? I mean, utilities such as FUP, SCF, BatchCom, SQL CI, edit. So these are all in play also. I mean, if you need to restrict access to these utilities and for access, you need a ServiceNow ticket, well, you can also configure them or instrument them with this workflow. Here, I'm going to show you an example of how to run the FUP utility program as super with the ServiceNow plugin. So I configured a command called FUP 255 snow. But the tricky part here is that instead of launching the FUP program directly, we set up another command that will launch Tackle because we need to do some pre-processing to trigger the ServiceNow workflow. Now, this is one way to configure a utility program, but there's a much simpler way that I'll show you in another slide. But let me just go through this example here. So we start a Tackle process. And just as in the previous example, we use the input attribute of the command to trigger the workflow. As you can see here, we're also launching PrivMac, the Tackle routine that triggers the workflow. And then we added a little bit of logic to this input statement. Again, it's very slick here. If the result comes back with let's exit the session, we do not execute that following statement that says XAC FUP 255. Again, we reject the command usage. But if the result comes back to you're good to go or the ticket is valid, then we will proceed with the execution of that XAC 55 command. Again, we embedded some logic here in this input statement. This will require a modification to your ACL, a little more intrusive than the previous example, but it's just another way of doing this. There's a simpler way to do it, and I'll get to that in a bit. Again, similar setup, but in this case, we launch a tackle that does the pre-processing, and then we execute the real XAC 55. And this could be a command that you've already configured previously that just sitting there. You don't have to touch it. We just have to create a new command to front end this particular one. And here is a running example of that utility program for you. Again, we launch the command. We start the ServiceNow workflow. The user is now prompted for all the inputs, the ticket type, ticket number, and the reason for the access. Request is approved, and then you see if PUF being launched here. The user has access to the session that they're requesting. And then when they exit, they're taken back to their logged on state. Again, same workflow as before. In this case, we're launching PUF. Now, again, what I mentioned was that this will require you to make some modifications to your ACL. So, and depending on how many utilities you have configured, it could get a little tedious for you. So you may not want to go this route. So I do have another example here that shows a simpler way to do this and probably less intrusive. And you might want to take advantage of this particular route. So what our shipping tackle routine PrintMac, you could take that routine basically, and with a few minor changes to it, you can load this up into your existing tackle environment so that users that need access to it have it available. So let's just say, for argument's sake, you've created a copy of this, and you've called the routine that triggers the workflow snow print command, basically. So once you've got this loaded, you can load this either through a tackle local, tackle custom, or a tackle segment file to make it available. And once it's available, a user that has access to an XAC command, you can just invoke the command by running the routine, passing in as an argument the PUF 255 command. Simple as that. You don't have to change the ACL. All you have to do is make a modification to PrintMac and load it up in your segment, and you're good to go here. And here is a running example of this scenario. As you can see, we start off with the invocation of the tackle routine, passing in the argument of your previously defined XAC command. The user is prompted for the inputs, the same inputs as before. Request is approved, and you're in your PUF utility program. Then you exit, and you're back. A much simpler workflow, more condensed, more concise. You don't have all the tackle logon sequence that you normally saw in the previous ones. And a much simpler way to configure this. And again, it's pretty straightforward. So you can do this with as I said, any other commands that you have already configured in XAC. It's very simple to do. And I would actually prefer this method, since it's less intrusive and no modifications to your existing ACL, because sometimes if you've got to modify that, you're probably going to need another ticket to do that. So this is a better way to approach this. Okay, and hopefully you can see this. This is just a sample of the kind of logging we do for this workflow. Highlighted in green, I pretty much showed the ServiceNow workflow that you saw in the previous examples, and we do log all this activity, so you do have some traceability as to who's invoking the command and what they're doing and what the prompts were and what the result was coming back after we evaluated the ticketing information that came back in ServiceNow. Again, in addition to the XAC, audits, we are now logging some more information for this particular workflow. Okay. So I talked a lot about ticket validation, evaluation criteria. So, well, how do we do this? I mean, where's the magic to this? How do we determine whether a ticket is valid or invalid? So we get back from ServiceNow a response body that is in JSON format that contains a whole bunch of fields, basically. In this example, I'm just basically highlighting a few ones that we are interested in for this example. So we are looking at the open date field, which is a date, a stage field, and a period field. These are all key value pairs. On the left side, we see a couple of definitions that we have in our property file, where you define for each ticket type the type of validations that you want to perform. And this is very flexible because you can change this anytime you want to. You can add fields to this. You can remove fields from this. I mean, whatever your policy is, they change. You can come and update this whenever you need to do that. For each ticket type that we need to validate, we have a definition for each, a definition section for each. As you can see, I have one here defined for a change request type ticket and one for an incident ticket. We also support a problem type ticket. So how does the evaluation work? So one of the first things we do, we evaluate, and I'm not showing it in the JSON body, but we get a field called sysclass name that has the type of ticket that this response was for. And let's just say the response was for a change request ticket. And that's the first evaluation we do. Is this for a change request ticket? Yes. Okay, then we continue with the evaluation. Is the open date less than the current time? Yes, it is. We continue. Does the state equal a value of 0? If it is true, we continue with the priority field. And we check, is it priority 1 of 1, 2, 3, 4? Yes. If all of these things evaluate to true, we determine that this ticket is valid. We respond back to the user interface program, and the user gets access to their session. As simple as that. If at any time any of these evaluations fails, for example, let's say we got back a state of a 1 from ServiceNow, but we're checking for a state of 0, that would immediately stop the evaluation and reject the request right away. We do not continue. So the evaluation happens sequentially for each type of ticket. If in this example, let's say the ticket was for an incident ticket. When we start evaluating this section here, the first thing, as I said, the first thing we do, we'll look for the sysclass name. It doesn't match what we got in response. So we will jump right away to the other section and start looking at the other definition for the incident ticket, and we start the evaluation process one more time. So again, it's very straightforward, very simple to use. We did implement a very basic scripting language for this, where you specify the actual field name that appears in the response body, and they have to match. For instance, if you misspell a field name in the evaluation criteria, when we look it up in JSON response, it's not going to match, and then that will be considered a failure. And we do that for every for all the fields that are specified here. And then I did mention that if your policy changes, for now you need to start looking at other fields that come back in the response body. You could just come in here and add a section for this. And restart the system. Now, for each field that we evaluate, as you can see here, we have an error message associated with it. If the check fails, we will return the appropriate error message to the user interface, so the user will know exactly why their request failed, and we log this to the audit file. Very simple. Most of these checks are string evaluations. We do some date checking, but again, it's very flexible, and we do have some documentation that different types of checks you can do and operations you can do with this scripting language that we implemented here. And then this is all set up in the properties file for the user interface program. Okay, there is another property file that we use, and that is the Json API file. This is where we specify the ServiceNow parameters, such as the endpoint URL, the query parameters that we send in ServiceNow, and the authentication of the ServiceNow using either basic or log 2. As I said earlier, that's the only 2 we support today, and in the future, we'll probably be supporting others that are currently supported by ServiceNow. For these parameters, you will need to contact your ServiceNow admin when you're setting up the system. Okay. Whoa, okay. I wasn't expecting to get here this quickly, but I guess what it does show, the simplicity of this architecture and how flexible it is. I think I covered everything that is very really useful to you in the future. And it's like as I said earlier, it's very easy to instrument your XAC commands. It is a secure REST API. The connection to the ServiceNow instance is SSL enabled. You may need some certificates for that communication to be established, but again, it's very secure. Steve, I'm going to turn this over to you, and I want to thank you guys for participating today, and see if you can continue with the rest of the items here.
Sure, really appreciate that, George. Fantastic description of the use cases and the most common ones our customers use. Now, one thing I did take away is this plugin is really going to help eliminate a lot of risk around manual process and unplanned changes. Nobody can do something on the system just because they have the privileges to do it. This takes the element of, even though I have access, I could fat finger something, or I could misuse my permissions. And we're all hearing zero trust constantly. And it gets us closer and closer to that model. And this is a key component to ensure that even though you have access to something, doesn't mean that that command or that activity is going to go through. And this helps us also leverage ServiceNow, which is in almost every environment, helps you now integrate a key component of your IT infrastructure into the ServiceNow workflow. So really appreciate all the descriptions, George. Really helpful.
Thank you.
So with that, really appreciate everybody's time, taking time out of your day to join us on the webinar. I do see a couple of questions in the chat box, and I'm going to pick those up right now. The first one, George, I'm gonna have you answer this one. The first question is around connectivity to ServiceNow. Does this mean that the firewall exception rules need to be in place to communicate or to allow NonStop to communicate with ServiceNow?
Yes, absolutely. One of the experiences that we've had with other customers is, they go through the setup process, and for whatever reason they forget that there's a network policy somewhere, and because we can't connect, and then we start troubleshooting, and we find out, oops, we forgot there is a firewall, the support that's blocked, we can't get to it. So yes, absolutely. So this is probably one of the first things, one of the requirements that I would suggest a customer tackle right away, because it will save you a lot of time. I can't tell you how many hours we spent in the past trying to figure out why we can't connect, only to find out that we're being blocked. Yep. Yeah, that's a good point.
One thing you mentioned earlier too is if you don't want to expose all of your NonStop instances to ServiceNow, what you can do is route them all through a single node and have that single node communicate with ServiceNow as the authority.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've done that with a customer too. Yes, and it works. It works beautifully. I mean, it's just seamless. It just works.
Awesome. Okay. Next question, I'll take this one, is do I need XAC to be able to integrate with ServiceNow? Yes, you do need XAC because this module is an add-on plugin to an already existing XAC environment. Now, if you don't have XAC, the entire package is available, XAC with the ServiceNow module. And our onboarding services will ensure that the application is installed properly, configured properly, and meets the requirements that you were looking for. So once you do acquire a license to the product, we'll white glove hand hold you throughout the entire installation process, and in fact, provide you training at the end to be able to manage and configure this yourself going forward. Okay. I don't see any more questions. So again, really appreciate everybody's time. I know taking an hour out of such a busy day can be challenging at times, but I hope you found this worthwhile. If there's more, if you want more information on this, if you want to expand on any of the topics that George or I covered, or if you've got some other ideas of how to leverage this, please feel free to reach out to us, email us, follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter. Check out our website if there's interest in ServiceNow or CyberArk integration. Those webinars are also online, and continue checking our website and our Twitter feeds for the next webinar. Again, thank you, everybody, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.